Master Georgie is a historical novel by English author Beryl Bainbridge, published in 1998. Set during the Crimean War of the 1850s, the story unfolds in 6 chapters and follows the experiences of George Hardy, a Victorian surgeon and photographer who leaves his comfortable life to volunteer for the war effort. The novel is narrated by 3 different characters: Myrtle, an orphan; Pompey Jones, a street performer; and Dr. Potter, a geologist. The story begins with Myrtle, who was found as a baby next to a dead woman in a dilapidated neighborhood in Liverpool, England. She is taken in by the affluent Hardy family, becoming George's adopted sister. Myrtle grows up in love with George, who largely ignores her. In 1846, when Myrtle is 12 and George is a medical student, she follows him to Liverpool's Washington Hotel, where he meets his colleague, William Rimmer. While waiting, Myrtle sees a boy retrieve a stolen duck for a poor woman in the park. She then follows George to a brothel, where they find George's father dead in a prostitute's bed. The boy from the park, nicknamed the Duck Boy, also enters the room. To protect the Hardy family's reputation, George enlists Myrtle and the boy's help to discreetly transport the body back home. They place Mr. Hardy's body in his bed and wait for a maid to discover it, while George takes a photograph of Myrtle next to the body. The narrative then shifts to the perspective of the Duck Boy, Pompey Jones, in 1850. 4 years after George's father's death, George keeps Pompey close as his photography assistant to keep their secret hidden. They develop a homosexual relationship, but Pompey resents not being treated as an equal. George, now a full-time surgeon, is married to Miss Annie Prescott, who is expecting their child. Myrtle, now 16, is at finishing school. One day, Pompey plays a prank by placing a tiger skin rug on a dining room chair, which shocks George's pregnant sister, Beatrice, causing her to miscarry. After hearing about this from Beatrice's husband, the intellectual Dr. Potter, George banishes Pompey from the Hardys' home. 4 years later, in 1854, Dr. Potter takes over the narration. At the onset of the Crimean War, George wishes to apply his surgical talents to the war effort. Along with Dr. Potter, Myrtle, Beatrice, Annie, and her 2 children, George embarks on a ship headed to the Crimea. Conditions in Constantinople are worse than expected, and Beatrice, Annie, and the children return to England. While George and Myrtle become increasingly accustomed to the horrific conditions, Dr. Potter begins to lose his grip on reality. The next chapter, also set in 1854, is narrated once again by Myrtle. The reader learns that Myrtle and George had carried on a sexual relationship in the past, and that Myrtle is actually the mother of Annie's children. While George and Myrtle plan to rekindle their love affair, their hopes are dashed when Pompey Jones re-enters the narrative as a fire eater with a traveling performance troupe. Dr. Potter warns Myrtle of Pompey's duplicitous nature. Narrated by Dr. Potter, the 5th chapter takes place later in October of 1854. On the eve of the Battle of Inkerman, the group embarks on a ship to help treat the victims of the imminent clash. On the ship, George treats patients suffering from war wounds and cholera. He learns from one patient that his old friend William Rimmer has died in battle. Meanwhile, Dr. Potter continues to lose his grip on reality, seeing visions of his wife Beatrice. In the final chapter, narrated by Pompey, the characters are 2 miles outside Inkerman, where a bloody battle rages. Pompey and Dr. Potter worry about escaping with their lives. In a hospital tent, George treats a mortally wounded 12-year-old drummer boy. As an act of mercy, Pompey puts the boy out of his misery by holding a cloth of ether over his face. On the battlefield, Pompey kills the enemy readily, having become inured to death. He makes a sexual advance toward Myrtle, insisting that they are cut from the same cloth, owing to their humble beginnings. When a Russian soldier kills George, the 3 survivors all react differently: Myrtle with hysteria, Mr. Potter with incomprehensibility, and Pompey with indifference. A New York Times book review notable book, Master Georgie is a psychologically complex examination of war and class in 19th century Europe. I hope you enjoyed this video. Leave a like if you did, and be sure to subscribe. Thank you.